We have a man, one of the most powerful men in the world. It's okay, comes from Kentucky, that's not bad. He's rock-ribbed Kentucky leader. He's been a leader for a long time. There's nobody tougher. There's nobody smarter. Tough cookie. I know tough people, he's tough.
President Trump with words of praise for Mitch McConnell at a rally in Kentucky back in October. Joining us now, the politics editor for New York Times Magazine, Charles Homans. He's the author of this week's cover story titled, Mitch McConnell Got Everything He Wanted, but at what cost? The president whom the Senate Republican leader helped elect has turned out to be the one thing he can't control. And Charles writes, in part, the shutdown distilled the essence of McConnell's position in Trump's Washington, a man of institutions and establishments whose own legacy was now tied to that of a president who seems hell-bent on burning both to the ground. Also joining us, NBC News senior correspondent Tom Brokaw. Gentlemen, good morning. We'll dig into Mitch McConnell in just a moment. Tom, first, though, your big picture thoughts. You've called this government shutdown embarrassing. It's unprecedented in its length, but can you remember watching a spectacle like this in your years covering Washington?
Well, I had two observations right off the bat. When we had the red moon the other night, remember? I think the moon was embarrassed by looking down on the United States. I think that was, his face got very red because of what's going on here. I've been looking into the last year of Richard Nixon. That was extraordinarily well run and organized compared to what's going on now. I mean, he was under siege, obviously. People forget that in October of 1973, Israel almost went down because it was invaded by Egypt and by Syria with the backing of the Russians. Nixon saved Israel during that time. If something like that happened now, I can't imagine the chaos that would exist in the national security offices and in the White House about how we respond to that kind of an international crisis. So it's a very troubling time. I think the Democrats are as much to blame right now as the Republicans are. They've got control of the House, but there's mostly just, we're not going to do what you want to do. I haven't seen a grand plan. And you've got the young people running through the halls who are the new members of Congress who are conducting pep rallies every day instead of getting together with the more moderate people or the people from the Midwest who have won in Ohio and Wisconsin and Minnesota, where they need to win again if they're going to get control. But they're being driven hard by the left. So it's a time of great chaos, is what I think. And as I talk to people around the country, in Montana and California and Texas, I was there last week, and in Florida, they say the same thing. Can't they get together? When are they going to get together and talk to each other?
I think embarrassing is the word, the one you used. Charlie, so let's talk about Mitch McConnell's role in all this. He sat on the sidelines for a very long time saying this is a fight between the White House and Democrats, leave me out of it. But when the president put his proposal on the table a couple of days ago, he said, I'm going to bring this up for a vote this week. What's been his approach to this? And is he watching these scenes play out in the country of federal workers not being able to make rent payments and not being able to pay for their medications and things like that? Has that impacted him on a human level at all?
I mean, I think that's a good question. I think he's mostly been happy to stay on the sidelines so far because he sees no real percentage in being involved in the negotiations at this stage. I mean, he doesn't see himself as having a lot of leverage, per se, between Pelosi and where the president's at on this. So I think that he's said repeatedly, including to me, that he will not bring a bill that the president is not willing to sign, which is a major impediment here, obviously. Before the new Congress began, he and Paul Ryan had worked out a compromise that would have at least pushed this off till February, provided a little more room to negotiate, but the president blew that up himself, and I think so. It's an interesting question. I think he's now at the point where he's under pressure from some of his own members to become involved because they are feeling the heat, back in their home states. Lisa Murkowski, for one, but I think it's an interesting position that he's in because he doesn't have a ton of leverage beyond the ability to simply bring up a bill for a vote on the floor.
Charlie, there are a handful of Americans, a small handful of Americans, who pay attention to the multiple news cycles each day and Twitter each day. They're called elected officials and members of the media, okay? But there's a larger scope here, the larger group of Americans who live day by day in this country. Does Mitch McConnell have any sense of history and how history might treat him?
I think he does. I mean, I think he has a sense of how history will treat him and how he wants to be treated by history. Whether that's how history will treat him, I don't know. I mean, he is walking an interesting tightrope right now, which I think is really called into sharp relief by the shutdown proceedings, where he's both tried to get a lot out of this relationship with Trump, which I don't think he expected to have happen, while also avoiding being tied too closely to this particular administration. When I asked him, how he felt about his own legacy and Trump's legacy being very much tied together, as they certainly will be in history, he sort of rejected that premise.
Did you get any sense from him of how he feels about Trump? What he thinks of him as a human being?
He's very careful and judicious in what he says. He says a lot by not saying a lot, I think, is the best way to put it. I don't think anybody mistakes their relationship for a close relationship or anything more than a working relationship.
But you did ask his wife, who happens to be Trump's transportation secretary, about their relationship and how that all plays out.
Right, and there was a long silence on the phone, and she punted the question off to the president and her husband. So I think that, I asked a lot of people around him if they liked each other, and virtually nobody was willing to give me a straight-up affirmative answer on that.
Mika?
Really strange. I want to bring Tom Nichols back into the conversation and just ask point blank, it might be kind of a weird question, but what should Mitch McConnell be doing? And is what he's not doing and other Republicans are not doing why you left the Republican Party in the first place?
Well, one of the reasons, and this goes back to the point Mike was making a moment ago about McConnell's place in history. It's really unusual to see the GOP in particular and the Senate in particular acting like a parliamentary party. Senators love the Senate. They love the institution of the Senate. They take it very seriously as the upper house. I mean, they really see themselves as something very much apart, even within the Congress. And to see McConnell essentially acting like the kind of party whip for Prime Minister Trump, where there always has to be, complete party discipline, whip everybody into line. That's not usually the character of the Senate. The Senate prizes its independence. And so, to me, I've been stunned, and one of the reasons that I couldn't be a Republican anymore is that when you get senators who say the institution of the presidency is more important than the Senate and our independent role as the upper house, then you're just an extension of the president's party. You're not even the president's party. You're an extension of the president's, personal cult of personality or vehicle for his whims. And that is a really strange position for a Senate Majority Leader to be in, because that is simply not the historical behavior of the Senate. And I think it's especially strange to see McConnell and the GOP in this situation. But that's obviously the road they've decided to go, and I don't see them deviating from it anytime soon.
Tom Brokaw, that phrase, the institution of the presidency, you mentioned Montana, California, Texas, Florida, places you've been recently. Do you think what's been going on for the past 2 years has truly altered people's impressions and feelings about the institution of the presidency and the American government, our country, how everything works?
I think that they still endorse the idea of America and the system that we have in place. But one of my friends in the West, who's a very strong Republican, said he's a clown. We don't like to listen to him, but we're conservatives out here. We don't have any other choices because we can't find anybody on the left that we want to deal with. And I think a big issue for the country at the moment is that no one is talking about. The Chinese are looking at this chaos. Moscow is looking at this chaos and saying, we can take advantage of it. Now is the time to move. In Southeast Asia for the Chinese, and the China Sea, Russia and Ukraine and Europe as well. Now's the time to go because we've got so much homegrown chaos. Look at the wall. I mean, the idea that you're going to put up that kind of a wall and keep all the Hispanics and other people out who are immigrants when we've got access to electronic oversight, looking down technology that they use in the military zones right now. And a lot of it has to do with race, frankly. I did a documentary a few years ago showing how the illegal Hispanics were working in Colorado and doing all the things that they ought to be doing, and the construction companies were happy to have them, finding a way to do them. But everybody worked at construction companies. I don't think I want brown grandbabies. I mean, there's a lot of that in the underlying part of it that people are not talking about it. But we have no imagination going on how we're going to deal with this and getting together, not just about who gets to come in and who doesn't get to come in. We've got to get control of our borders. That's indisputable. But this is not going to change that, frankly.
And as Jim Clyburn said just a minute ago, we're for that as well, but we want high-tech solutions, not the physical barrier along the wall.
Yeah.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.